Now, for those that can get there and those that are lucky enough to be part of a university, maybe they just got off the train and came to ACU or UNSW or UCID. But this is what students do in these very expensive facilities. We build a beautiful building and then we put some great comfortable lecture seats, and then students fall asleep in them. Now, I'm sure this was a staged photo, but it does actually look a lot like a lecture hall when I went to university that I actually used to go to sleep in. Because it was very comfortable. So, at one point I was attending lectures because I was staying up all night doing projects, and I figured if I need to sleep, I'll just go to the lecture. Because after 5 or 10 minutes, nothing put me to sleep as well as the lecture. But even then, on the edges of a university, there are a lot of additional costs that actually severely impact the way students behave and sort of the decisions they make in their life. So, for example, the cost of traditional resources, things like textbooks, and textbooks is something that even today a lot of lecturers would just recommend. They'll just say, oh yeah, this is the recommended text for the course, and some students buy it, some don't. These days most students probably don't buy it. But even then, students actually look at the cost of these books, and they make decisions on if they're going to study the course. Now, if a student is looking at taking a course, let's say, maybe it's they're doing a finance degree and they're looking at a course, a history course or something that they want to do in their spare time, and the textbook is expensive and they choose not to do that course, that student is not as well informed for the rest of their life just because they didn't want to buy a textbook. But they've actually surveyed students, and many students around the world actually are taking fewer courses or taking different courses because of the cost of a book. So these are factors that we might not think of as a university or as an education provider. But these are real things that influence students. And particularly in countries, fast-growing countries or developing countries, where the cost of a textbook is actually equivalent to the tuition fee sometimes. Like there are publishers going into a lot of countries and they charge the same price in US dollars for a textbook in that country as they would in the US or Australia. And the tuition fees at those universities are about the same as that. In Malaysia, the tuition fee for a public university is maybe a couple thousand ringgit, so like $500 a year. Or $600 a year. And that's actually equivalent to a lot of textbooks you would need to buy. Now, for those who didn't attend university when they're younger or want to go back and reskill or retrain, time is a huge challenge. Many people can't actually find the time to attend a university, or the course isn't offered at the time they want. Now, for universities, it's just very easy to schedule classes at particular times, but for most people in society, they just can't make those times. You may have to take care of your kids, or you may have to go home and do something, or you may just be working late. And over time, you'll just realize you can't actually finish. So completion rates for even postgraduate face-to-face degrees can be quite low sometimes. So at the same time, there are some benefits, obviously, to being in a face-to-face environment. I'd say that collaboration comes naturally. Well, you'd hope so. When there's a few people sitting together, at some point you should probably start talking to each other. You will start talking to each other, even if you're just complaining about something. Like being able to develop your interpersonal skills, your collaboration skills, and just finding yourself and finding causes that you care about is very important. So that's we shouldn't forget about that value. The challenge is can we have that and everything else and still get enough people going through universities? So, if you look at online courses today then, I think the question then is, are these online courses actually providing a good enough experience to replace what you currently get face-to-face? Now, there are all those challenges to face-to-face education I mentioned, and online is supposed to be a way of solving some of those, but it isn't always. So, if you look at a lot of online courses today, this is a course from Coursera, and their tagline is, take the world's best courses online. Well, I was watching, the course is mostly a video, and in the middle of a video, a quiz pops up. And in that quiz, there's, a number of different responses, and I'm slightly dyslexic, so even if I know the right answer, I might actually select the wrong one, because they're all so similar. But surely, this isn't the world's best education. I can't believe that people going through MIT or Harvard or Stanford are going for this. They're certainly going for a lot more on campus. They're going to interact with other people. But in many ways, a lot of the top universities in the world their rankings are based on research rather than the quality of their education, and they select the best students coming in. So in many ways, there's actually less work to do. I challenge a lot of them and say that their teaching is probably nowhere near as good as many teaching universities around the world that actually have to take in students who they have no choice in selecting. You just take in everyone who's there, and your job is to transform them into better educated people. Now that's something that I'd say a lot of lecturers or educators at some of these top universities in the world are not actually capable of doing. But still, this is what they offer online, and everyone sees this and they think that could be a great course. You go on a place like edX, and their tagline is quality education for everyone, everywhere. Now, this one, there's also a lecture, and then also a slide pops up with about 5 very similar questions. And the challenge with this is, at the end of the day, you're really just trying to memorize things that you just saw. And memorization, while it may have been a skill that was useful before we had the internet, it's not as relevant today. I mean, it's rare that an employer or anyone in society will stop you in the middle of your street, stop you in the middle of your job and say, hey, I need you to calculate, the log of this. And you can't use a calculator. You can't Google. And then there's someone else will say, I need you to, learn this new programming language, but, you have to memorize the syntax. You're not allowed to check anything. Just use your memory, and then let's execute it and hope it works. And I'll come back in like a day. No one does that anymore. These days, everyone knows they have access to all the information anywhere in the world. So it's no longer a question of, being able to recall information. We're no longer, trying to get students to memorize as much as possible. Now the goal is, can they analyze things? Can they make connections? Can they actually discern fact from fiction? Can they, go on the internet and know which information may or may not be correct, or which news may or may not be correct? So those are the challenges. And, just going through these memorization exercises isn't going to help you. This is another one from Linda. Linda is really just a collection of videos, but they've managed to get people to pay for them, so kudos to them. I wouldn't really call it a new skill, especially after doing how many hours of that? What's that? 30 hours of Photoshop videos? And then, if you look at what people are actually saying about these programs, this is on Quora, which is a question-and-answer site. So it says, why are universities able to get away with offering classes with bad professors? This is a common question that students, they walk into university, the first course they do, this is what comes to their mind. They're like, okay, I got into this great university, I paid this incredible fee, but how is it possible that this is what I've got? It's actually baffling to a lot of students. And more today, students are starting to question the value of that. Even when I went to university, which doesn't feel like all that long ago, and probably doesn't look like all that long ago, but it's about 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I first started university. And I actually wondered that, but at the time I figured, this must be how it is. But these days, students, I think, are a bit more discerning. It's very funny responses on Quora. So I think in that case, if we look at where online learning has to go, I think we just have to think of it as learning in general. We shouldn't really differentiate between the sort of online and offline concept, because I think that leads to its own problems. As soon as you say like online, you think, I've got to do everything online. I've got to be sitting in a computer the entire time. But that's actually not the case. We should really be looking at the most effective ways of educating students, and that involves many aspects of both online and offline education. And many students coming into university today actually don't make that distinction the way we might, when we look at things. Because they've only grown up in a world which is actually blended in some form. They've grown up always using a device for certain things, and things that happen on Facebook or Instagram, those are just, reflections or recordings of things that happened in real life. They are in a different world. So I think we should look at the ways in which we design courses so that we draw in the best parts of both online and sort of offline education. Now, one of the ways we do that is actually by just going back in time and looking at a lot of the research that's been out for the past 60 years. Because at the end of the day, if you look at all of those online courses we just looked at, edX and Linda, they're really just looking at remembering, recalling information. And in Bloom's taxonomy, which I think is about 50 or 60 years old, it was very clear back then that this was the way that courses shouldn't be designed. But still today, as soon as we've moved online, the first thing we've done is recorded a lecture of someone talking, which is generally someone explaining a number of facts. And then we put a test to see if you remember those facts. Now, it's interesting, I think, that even today, in 2018, after the internet's, 2017 actually, I've got to blame myself. But even today, after the internet's been around and websites have been around for over 20 years, we're still looking at online education as a memorization exercise. Like many other websites, news websites have moved beyond this, but somehow online education has. So I think it's been clear for some time. So I love this quote from Albert Einstein. It says, "The true sign of intelligence is not about knowledge, but imagination." And I think that's key, more and more today than ever before. Because knowledge in and of itself doesn't actually hold much value. All those facts are out there, they're all available. But we have to get better at actually drawing connections and understanding those. And the way you do that isn't by just trying to memorize them. It's really by looking at how you can design learning experiences that go to the top of those skills, that go to really the higher order thinking skills. How do you create things? How do you analyze things? How do you evaluate things critically and effectively? And those are the skills that we can actually instill online, but it hasn't been done properly. So inside Open Learning itself, when we first started off with the company, we started building the platform to enable people to design courses like this. And as soon as we built it, obviously the first version I don't think was that great, but it's improved since. But even then, most people would just upload what they currently had. They would take their lecture slides, they take their quizzes, and they upload them to the platform. And my team and I thought to myself, we went through all this effort to build a platform, and they just used the exact same way they used everything else. There's no difference. So what instead we focused on was how we actually design the platform to encourage the right sort of learning design behaviors and the right mechanics inside courses. How do we reduce barriers to communication, set the defaults in such a way that students are encouraged to communicate, and even change the language and the color scheme of things so students feel more motivated and empowered. So a simple example of that is actually changing the language that we use in education. So most of the language in education comes from sort of this industrial revolution mindset, like the factory mindset. You know, it's all about authority and submission and review and marking and grading, and it just puts you through a process where you're always trying to get approval from some sort of authority. But that's not really how education should be. I mean, that's not how you instill creativity. It's not how you inspire people. So simple things like instead of we don't use the word submit or submission anywhere on the site. There's no reference to marking, even though our assessment system lets you produce a mark. For us, the focus is on sharing and posting and discussion. Instead of grading, it's more around feedback. Instead of marking specific activities, every activity in Open Learning is aligned to learning outcomes, and all of the evidence of learning is aggregated under those outcomes. So if you want to know if someone actually met the outcomes in a course, you can actually see it. You can see what they did to achieve those outcomes, rather than just looking at a mark at the end of it. But doing all of that has taken us some time. And we've designed the platform around sort of these 5 levels, which is kind of like an upside-down Bloom's taxonomy with some examples. But if you go into our blog, we actually write a lot of content, a lot of articles about ways of actually achieving this and ways of actually designing these activities. And internally, we actually have a whole series of learning design patterns that our learning design team uses when they work with universities and educators to rebuild their courses. So when we started off, it was a few engineers for the most part, but now the company has about 66 people, and only 12 of them are actually engineers. Most of the company is actually in what we call learning services, and that team is comprised of learning designers, graphic designers, content experts, and they actually work with educators and understand the content that they have to redesign the courses in this kind of way. Now, that wasn't our intention. We hoped that everyone could just do it themselves. And we still provide lots of courses, and even today, our team's probably only built about 2 or 3% of all the courses on Open Learning. So we still encourage everyone else to use the platform themselves with do-it-yourself mindset, but our team gets more and more involved in helping to shape best practice on the platform. So some of these learning design patterns that we use, this is just a short list, but things like creating and constructing something, and then sharing it and exhibiting it with other people. So rather than just telling people, hey, this is what it is, sometimes it's best to give an example and then have people actually find and discover things in the real environment and bring them back into the course. Take pictures of things they go and see on the side of the road and post them inside the course and share their feedback on them. Try and wonder or be curious about why things are designed the way they are. So there are a number of ways to do that. The other is reciprocal teaching, crowd curation, feedback, peer reviews, role-playing. These are all things that you can actually do online. And by doing it online, it's more about creating the environment where students are shown how to do it, they can reflect on it, they can share their experiences, but they might actually do most of the activity off of a computer. Or they might be doing it from their phone while they're actually walking around and talking to people. So not everything has to be done online. So this is a simple example from a course. And it says, our construction activities make a mark on the natural environment. So I think this is a sort of engineering sustainability course. And in this course, students are actually looking at the changes in the natural environment because of cities over a period of a couple hundred years. Now, there are many interesting ways you can look at this, but in this one, students are actually shown how to go out and find these examples themselves. So they can go on Google Earth, they can look at history books, they can actually find examples of the way in which a city that matters to them has changed. So maybe they've always been curious about, how their hometown would, looked 200 years ago. Maybe it didn't look any different at all. Maybe it wasn't even there. So students can use tools like Google Earth Engine to do that, and then they can actually share the examples and the differences inside the platform, and then they can discuss those. They can like them, they can comment on them, and they can see, what other people are doing as well. And in these sort of activities, it's not so much about submitting to a teacher. It's more sharing with the community. So students do it because they're interested. So you can actually go through and see how different people have used the platform in different ways. Sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised by how people use Open Learning. Sometimes I'm disappointed by how they've used it. But I think it's a reflection of where the education system is at. And our goal is just to help people sort of do the best they can. Now, in the context of MOOCs, all of these examples, all of these things are really just, I think, good practice in learning and teaching. And MOOCs are a new buzzword, so to speak. I mean, new in the sense that now it's probably about 5 or 10 years old, depending who you ask. But the key parts of a MOOC, the fact that it's a massive, open, online course, I think are actually quite revolutionary for universities, and they are actually driving some of this change. So the fact that a course is massive, so to speak, really should mean that it's designed to support a large number of people. Now, when you design a course to support a large number of people, you can't rely on having a student-teacher ratio of sort of 1 to 10 or 1 to 20 as a normal sort of tutorial would. But most online degrees are actually still designed in a way that they assume, there's one teacher looking after a bunch of students. But the way you design these courses effectively is you really focus on changing the role of a teacher into a facilitator and designing activities that don't require direct intervention from a teacher themselves. So the teacher or the facilitator in that case is really there to set the tone of the community, to identify best practice, to identify any problems in the community before they cause any real issues, and to really guide everyone in the same direction. Now, they might also identify challenges students are facing and help design new activities that everyone can do to address those, or maybe they'll find that the students in the course are really helping everyone out and encourage them as well. The second part, which is the openness. The fact that a course is open to everyone in the world, I think, is a great concept. And it's one that I think is still happening. There's still lots of people running sort of free courses for the public. But more and more you're seeing a lot of the platforms sort of lock down the courses, charging for certain things in the course, putting out paywalls in certain ways. And I think that speaks to one of the challenges MOOCs have faced, which is around the completion rates and the number of people who actually want to pay to get a certificate at the end of the MOOC. Now, in many ways, I think that's a reflection of a couple things. One is the quality. I think a lot of people have gone into MOOCs and they've seen a lot of these courses, which are just videos and quizzes, and they've seen no real reason to complete them. And because of those courses are quite superficial, the certification you get doesn't actually mean anything. It's not a real certification in any way. But more and more as the quality of courses improves, we're seeing that in fast-growing and developing countries around the world, MOOCs are actually being used as a form or as a lower-cost way of delivering accredited education to students around the world. So rather than just doing a short 2-week-long course and getting a certificate with the university's logo with no real meaning to it, universities are now starting to offer real courses that lead towards credit at the university. And that's changing the entire dynamics of sort of the MOOC market. So I think those are probably the two key concepts. Now, this leads into some of the opportunities that I see for education technology around the world. One is that only a small percentage of the world today actually holds a degree of any form, whether it's a diploma or a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. Only a very small percentage. And that's even with such a high expenditure on universities and higher education. I mean, even countries like in Malaysia, for example, they spend about 6 to 7% of their GDP on higher education, which is about twice as much as the OECD average. But still, the participation rate is just creeping up to 40%. Now, really, they need to get it higher than that, but they can't keep investing this much money in higher education. So they have to look at ways of delivering higher quality education at a lower cost. Now, this is critical for many countries because the OECD estimates that unless your participation rate reaches around 45%, it's hard to have sustainable economic growth. Because as the economy grows, you require more people who are highly skilled. And those skills only come from a proper education. So unless countries can keep up with demand for education, they can ensure the quality is higher, then they won't be able to keep growing at the rate they need to improve everyone's livelihoods as they hope they would. So I think in specific countries, obviously, these challenges will be addressed in different ways. There isn't one way of solving it in every country. But I think for education technology entrepreneurs, they can actually go to many countries around the world that many other companies might not have thought about and find a solution that works for that country. And I think one of the most exciting things about education, higher education in particular, is that this is an industry where, even in a small country, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So in a tiny country like Australia, we don't have many industries that would be considered, tens of billions of dollars or billions of dollars. But higher education is one. It's about a $30 billion Australian a year industry in Australia. In Malaysia, it's about $10 billion a year, US. In other countries, that aren't as wealthy as Australia and Malaysia, it's still a $1 billion market. So it's a huge opportunity for someone to go into these countries and really work with people there to carve out a solution. And in Malaysia, they've been working on that. So one of the key initiatives that we've been working on there is using MOOCs to actually help students all around the country take courses without actually being at the university. So each of the 20 public universities has been building MOOCs on open learning for the past 3 years. And these are actually real accredited courses. So these courses are used as both blended courses on campus, and if you're not on campus, you can take the course and actually get a certificate, and that leads towards credit transfer. So they've released the world's first credit transfer guideline for MOOCs. And universities are now starting to accept that. So I was recently at one university in Malaysia, and I was talking to a number of students, and one of the things they said is that, our lecture here is boring, but we've actually gone on open learning and we've done the course from this other university halfway around the country. And instead of showing up to the current course, they do that one, and they get credit for that. And that's the dynamic that the MQA and the Ministry of Higher Education in Malaysia is actually trying to create. They're trying to create a sense of competition based around quality, because then universities can no longer take for granted that they've locked in the student for 4 years. The universities have to keep working to create better and better courses that really engage the students. And maybe at the same time, some universities will stop offering those courses they're actually not very good at. So rather than building the same course at every university in the country, a few universities will build a few different versions of the courses, and students from any university can choose those courses. So that's already starting to happen. But I think the big opportunity for Australia as well, and particularly for educational institutions here, is working out a way to actually deliver a high-quality education from Australian universities online at a low cost in different countries. Because at the moment, from what I can see, most Australian universities go overseas, and they try and charge the same fees they charge in Australia. I mean, a lot of universities in Australia or I speak to on a regular basis, they ask about promoting their degree programs in Malaysia or in Southeast Asia. And I ask them how much they charge. And they're like, oh, well, MBA is, 40,000 Australian dollars. And I said, well, realistically, how many students are you going to get? And they said they're happy with only a few students. But really, the real opportunity is if Australian universities can adopt these new technologies and deliver accredited qualifications at a tenth the cost they would normally deliver them. And they'll get probably 100 times as many students. And they can partner with local institutions and local training centers in each country. But I think that's where the real opportunity is, because otherwise here in Australia we'll be relying on local students and international students who may not always come to the country and subsidize the education for the rest of us. So that's pretty much all from me. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is my team in KL at our Raya gathering earlier this year. So if you're ever in KL, drop me an email and you can come by and visit.
So I will take questions from the floor. Maybe I'll seed it. And I'm going to get Winston to ask a question. My seating was, you spoke of Professor Buckland as an inspiration and his style. How do you, for the sake of, I guess, Australian EdTech, as well as if not broader into robotics and other fields, medtech and who knows what, how do you capture the sort of Richard Buckland type environment and spread that? What can institutions do to create more Richard Bucklands?
Right. So Richard is what I probably classify as a rock star lecturer. So he's very charismatic. He's an engaging lecturer, and he's fantastic. And every university probably has a few people like that. But the goal isn't to make everyone into that. So really, when we look at the way courses are run in design.